I stepped into the private corridor and saw James press a folded receipt into Evelyn Moore's hand, as if it were nothing more than an errand. My suspicion flared before my brain could finish naming it.
What is that?
My hand found the
It's
sleeve
him.
of my dress
I
and
knew
tightened. "James," I said, voice flat enough that the corridor swallowed it. He jerked,
They're all
then
connected.
folded his face into the
Show me
polite
how.
expression he kept for photographs. Evelyn straightened and smiled with a measured tilt. The receipt slipped, small and white, into a palm that did not belong to our life. Suspicion pushed me forward. I moved closer and bumped James's shoulder with my hip so that the paper shifted, and a corner showed a name I knew was not mine. I saw the letters on the corner, an unfamiliar woman's name, typed neat. My pulse sped, and I could feel the skin at my throat prickle. "What is this?" I asked. The corridor smelled like cold stone and someone else's perfume. That physical detail fixed me. A human perfume I did not own pressed into our story. I had rehearsed calm before I left the ballroom. I had told myself to smile, to wave, to return to the stage and not make a scene. Calm felt like survival. Now suspicion moved from the edges of my mind into the decisions I needed to make. If this was a private mistake, I wanted to understand. If this was a pattern, I wanted to name it. I took the paper with 2 fingers and unfolded it so it lay between us. His eyes slipped away. "Ava, James." He kept his voice low. He kept his hands careful. "This is nothing. It looks like a name on a receipt," I said. I kept my voice lower and steadier. "Whose name is it, James?" I said his name to make him speak it. James swallowed. There was movement in the hall behind us, an assistant passing, a pair of heels that belonged to the charity chair. And for a moment he softened with the reflex to protect the image. He stepped back as if measuring how much of himself to show. "Ava, I'm telling you, it means nothing. Please, there are cameras close. Just don't make this tonight." Maya arrived at the stairwell door with a tray and 2 forced smiles. She looked at the paper on the floor between us and then at me. "Ava, is everything okay?" "Maya." She set the tray down with a small clink that sounded loud in my ears. I had known Maya for 3 years. She was careful and thorough and said names with concern. Her worry landed differently than James's practiced restraint. "Maya, look." I handed the folded receipt to her. Her fingers brushed mine. "Whose name is this?" Maya read it and her face lost the last of its event. "Night gloss, Evelyn Moore," she said. "She was at the reception a minute ago." Her voice dropped on the last word. She stepped back as if the hallway itself might recoil. James reached for my wrist and I did not let him. His touch was meant to steady, but I felt only the pressure of a man who had kept the script longer than the truth. "Ava, don't," he said, "please." "Not here, not here," I repeated. I saw palms growing tight at the base of his fingers. "You hand a receipt to Evelyn Moore in a corridor. This is not a private mistake if it has a receipt." He blinked and his jaw worked. "Ava, you don't understand." Maya watched us for a heartbeat and then said, "James, the cameras." Her sentence cut off. She was thinking about the gala, the live stream, the speeches. She thought public image first because she was responsible for the timeline. That was her job. Her priorities pulled at the wound. An argument unspooled anyway, tight and fast. It was 3 sharp lines. "James, explain." I said. "Ava, breathe." James answered. "Maya, call security." "Maya." It felt like a rehearsal cracking at the seams. The corridor narrowed and the air between us carried each line like a thrown cloth. We moved into the service stairwell because James needed distance from the cameras and because I wanted a private corner where names could be answered. The stairwell smelled of cleaning solution and the faint metallic tang of the building. James leaned against concrete and ran his hand through his hair in the exact nervous motion I had seen in photographs when something broke in his schedule. It was nothing. He said again, "It was an arrangement for the event, an endorsement meeting," I said, "Who paid for it?" And watched his face. He avoided my eyes. Maya stayed at the landing and listened with her arms folded, her chin tight. When she spoke, she used fewer words. "James, I can check his card logs." She named him by his first name and by his role in the night. That made it harder to hide behind reputation. He a version of events that left holes. He called Evelyn a vendor. The paperwork was routine. Me to keep calm for the cameras. Each sentence was an attempt to lower the temperature, to steer us back onto the timeline he had rehearsed for the family. His mouth said reasonable things and his hands kept busy. My reaction moved suspicion to a quiet anger. My fingers found the ring I wore every day and I fumbled it until the metal rubbed across my skin. Maya called the event organizer's line while we argued. Her voice was clipped and efficient when she said, "Gideon, we need to talk now." She set her phone on speaker. Gideon's voice came through, surprised, then guarded. Where we were. Quick facts snapped between us, location, time, the paper. Gideon, he would come to the backstage office. The call ended and we had a moment where everything could have been contained. We returned to the ballroom because appearances had to be kept for a little longer. Eleanor Carter waited near the orchestra with her hands folded, the small dated brooch at her throat catching the light. She stepped forward the moment she saw us together, and her voice was soft but hard-edged. "Ava," she said, "you managed the last set beautifully. Remember your smile. Tonight is about the family." Eleanor's hands moved with the economy of someone who spent her life arranging impressions. She took my elbow and steered me toward the center of the room where applause arrived like a tide. "Remember your role," she said again. "We have positions to maintain. Your expression must hold." Her face did not ask if I wanted to hold it. It gave instruction. I forced the smile I had practiced and walked through the applause while my mind catalogued scenes. James's hand, the folded receipt, Gideon's name, Maya's watchful eyes. Every public clap was a small instrument that kept me on cue. Someone touched my back, an acquaintance offering condolences that were half compliment. I kept moving. I kept the smile until the lights brightened the faces in the room. In the ladies' lounge, Maya slid an envelope across the lacquered table, so it stopped at my knuckles. The room smelled of hand cream and lemon polish. The envelope was anonymous, no stamp, no handwriting. Inside was a staged photograph of James with a woman whose hair had been arranged for a quick portrait and a typed note that read, "Keep your smile or this goes public." The sentence had no signature. My skin cooled. Maya's expression sharpened. "Who gave this to you?" I asked. She folded her hands and said, "It was slipped to me by an unsigned courier at the door. I thought it was rehearsal material." I didn't open it until now. Her eyes tracked me to measure whether I would collapse or fight. That gaze made me decide not to dissolve in the room. "This is blackmail," I said out loud. The word had the literal weight of a legal charge as well as the promise of spectacle. I kept my voice steady and used it as a tool. "We trace the number. We find whoever sent it." Maya nodded and reached for her phone again. She was methodical under pressure, the exact kind of ally I needed. We followed the number and it led us to Gideon in the backstage office. Gideon had been an organizer long enough to know which doors to open and which to keep locked. When he leaned back in his chair, he had that same careful softness he used when booking performers. "Maya him about the courier." Gideon faltered. There had been extra hands at the entrance. People were underpaid and asked for more overtime. Then he said, "I didn't know whose idea it was, really. I was paid to arrange moments." The sentence landed differently than anything I expected. Maya's fingers tightened on the phone. "Paid by who?" she asked, voice flat. Gideon's eyes dropped. He admitted the line on his books pointed to James's account. He did not use the word order at first. He pretended confusion and then the paperwork produced a name and an internal transfer number. Gideon's body language changed as if he had dropped a burden he could never lift. The revelation bent the room. I felt transported into a new level of danger. This was not an accidental receipt. This was a mechanism. "Gideon, payments came from a corporate account, Carter Holdings. I can pull the invoices." I didn't look at names. I was told to make things look natural. I was paid to stage moments. His voice slid down by degrees until he was almost whispering. "Maya him to print everything." We walked to the loading bay because Gideon insisted the signed invoices were there. The night air hit us like a different temperature. The bay smelled of diesel and cardboard. James followed, not sprinting but keeping focused, and his hands were empty in the way of a man hoping secrecy could still be salvaged. Ava, this is a mistake. Gideon knows how to handle vendors. His eyes were careful. Maya read the invoices aloud. This line says staging fee. It references a dinner with Evelyn Moore and a separate hospitality payment. There's an internal memo that says, maintain narrative for Carter family image. The words rearranged the facts into purpose. I felt anger take the shape of work. I lifted the invoices, scanned each line, and matched dates. My hands moved in exact motions of checking, crossing, making notes. My feelings shifted. Suspicion to anger to a cold fear about what those payments meant. James tried to explain in short sentences. Ava, listen, it was for publicity. You know how these things look. His voice had the low steadiness he used with reporters. James, you signed these transfers, I said. The word signed made him blink. My fingers tapped the stamp marks. I said, James, whose name did you use? There was a quiet exchange then, 3 to 5 lines of sharp back and forth that broke into the open. James, you used our account for staged moments. I said, Ava, I thought. James began, thought. I asked, you thought you'd protect us by scripting us. I said his name to keep him grounded. Eleanor arrived in the loading bay without fanfare, the click of her heels precise. She stepped between us and unfolded a small dossier she carried. The printed photograph in her hand looked the same as the one in the envelope. She folded the dossier closed and said, Ava, these are dangerous. Think about what happens if your reaction becomes the story. Think about the children in our circle. Think about the foundation. Eleanor's voice carried the weight of calculations. She appealed to obligations and positions. She used facts the way she used her brooch. Gideon stood and nodded. He wanted to repair the damage he had helped engineer. James reached for me then, and his hand hovered near my wrist. I looked at him directly and saw something that had not been there at the corridor. Fatigue edged with a real fear. Ava, it's not what you think. We can contain this. We'll pay to bury it. We'll call in favors. My response was a movement rather than a speech. I set the invoices on the steel table between us and walked to the opposite wall. My fingers found the wedding band I wore. I had to decide in that moment whether to act for myself or to rehearse another compromise. My breathing shortened. My palms were dry. My feelings shifted again, fear to resolve. I heard myself say, no more performances. Not for them. Not tonight. Eleanor's face hardened. Ava, you cannot walk away from this family without consequences, she said. Her sentence had the weight of decades of negotiation. She named consequences in precise terms: reputation, donations revoked, board members pulled. Her catalogue of outcomes read like a ledger. We will make sure your future is managed, she added. James put his hand on my shoulder and said, Ava, please. Think of what we built. He used the word we as an attempt to bind our histories. I turned to him. James, who did you intend to protect with all this? I asked. My voice was smaller but sharper. My hands trembled when I pushed the ring so that it slid partway off my finger. He did not answer for a long beat. Gideon cleared his throat. Maya folded her arms and said, Eleanor, if this goes public now, those donations will leave anyway, and the story will be worse if you try to spin it. Ava, we can give you space to make a statement when you're ready. We will manage press. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She tried a different tactic of a think practically. For the cameras tonight, walk back in and smile. Let us buy a bit of time while we sort the accounts. We can handle Gideon and his vendor network. I felt my decision gather into a single action. I took off the ring and set it on the steel table. The metal hit the surface with a hollow sound. My motion was precise. I did not shout. I did not beg. I walked away from the table, through the metal door, and into the cold street where the lamp cast a narrow pool of light. Maya stood at the curb and watched me approach with a small knitted expression that said she understood I had chosen deliberately. Outside, the air made me inhale in a new way. I could feel my lungs work against the cold. I put my palm flat on the ring so that the cool metal steadied me. Maya stood beside me. She did not speak at first. Then she said, Ava, are you sure? Her voice was practical and small. I nodded. The word I did not use was freedom. The action I chose was simpler. A factual step away from the stage. Someone walked past on the sidewalk and glanced at us as if at a pair who had left a party too early. I folded the ring into the palm of my hand and left it there on the polished table in the study where they had tried to threaten me. The action would register. It would be a fact. It would be something they could photograph if they wanted. The last line in the chapter is not a proclamation but a motion. I stepped under the lamp and put both hands into my coat pockets. Maya closed the trunk of the limousine without fuss. I did not look back. The night stayed alive with the distant echo of music. I did not promise anything to the cameras or to Eleanor. I had chosen a single, concrete act: to leave my ring where it could be counted and to walk out into the cold with a friend waiting across the curb. That decision changed the immediate ground beneath us, and it made the story one that others would have to react to rather than control. The night would not end the questions, but I had ended the performance I refused to keep playing. I pushed through the terrace door and saw James hand a folded receipt to Evelyn in plain view. Suspicion flared hot and hard in my throat. I could not let it pass as a mistake. The reception chatter continued inside. I stood on the terrace with a drink cooling on my palm and watched the paper change hands, like a private payment displayed in public. My chest tightened. I stepped forward and said, "James." His face tightened. The moment snapped like glass. I have to say what I do and who I am because I do not have time for slow build-ups. I am Ava Monroe. I wore a navy silk dress tonight. I had spent the afternoon arranging seating and rehearsing the polite smile I use at these events. My ring felt heavier than usual against my finger. I kept my voice flat when James, "Ava, it's nothing." I heard the scrape of a chair and a quiet laugh from a nearby table. I moved closer. The problem was clear within 5 sentences. A public exchange that matched the private receipt I had seen before. The receipt from the study in Chapter 1 echoed in my mind. I had watched him press a folded receipt into Evelyn Moore's hand in the corridor once. I remembered the angle of his wrist then and the way his jaw set. That earlier moment had left a prickling suspicion. Tonight made that prick into a burn. I am not someone who ignores patterns. Evelyn lifted her chin when she saw me. Her lipstick was the same deep red she favored at charity events. James tried to smooth his expression. Amelia arrived at my side before I could speak a second time. Amelia placed a hand on my elbow and said, "Ava, come with me." Her voice was insulated with control. "Amelia, what is this?" I asked. My voice did not waver. I kept my hands visible. "James, what did you give her?" "Ava, it's nothing you need to worry about, James," and he glanced at Amelia for cover. His words were polite, the kind of line you use to close a room. He avoided my eyes. My suspicion shifted into a harder edge. Doubt became accusation. Amelia stepped between us. "Please, not here." Her fingers tightened on my elbow. She spoke the word appearance like it was a contract. Guests moved closer, their plates and conversations forming a buffer that James used as armor. I pulled my arm free. "Not here." I asked, "You want me to leave while you hand money across a terrace?" The sentences came sharp. People turned. I felt every pair of eyes as a small weight. Amelia lowered her voice. "You don't understand, Ava. There are donors here. There is a schedule. Don't do this now." Her insistence was quick. She used the word schedule like it could hold everything together. A man I had noticed earlier, Marcus Lee, stood a few feet away in the service shadow. He was a family friend and a donor liaison. Marcus watched us, then stepped forward. "Ava, can we talk out of earshot?" he asked. His tone did not pity me. It offered a pathway. "Marcus, tell me what this is," I said. I held the folded receipt in my palm. I had slipped a finger under the paper when James moved away. The paper had his name on parts of it. I saw the numbers. Marcus glanced at James and Amelia, then at Evelyn. "Not good. Come with me." His speech was measured. He moved toward the service stairs and I followed. The terrace door cried shut behind us. We dropped down the narrow service stair into the back corridor. The kitchen clatter-thinned behind a metal door. Marcus closed his hand around mine and kept walking. I could feel my pulse in my throat. My suspicion shifted again, now into fear. Fear that whatever this paper represented would reshape our life in public. In the corridor, Marcus, I saw the exchange. I didn't know what to do until you stepped out." He did not touch my arm. He kept a distance that matched the one he had always held with the family, support without intrusion. "Ava, you should see what I saw." His voice was low. I asked, "What did you see, Marcus?" He hesitated. He handed her the receipt. He didn't hide it. Marcus's words were plain. Then he moved away like it was routine. "Routine," I repeated. "For who?" My jaw tightened. The corridor's fluorescent lights hummed above our heads. Marcus opened his mouth and closed it twice. Amelia's shadow appeared at the corridor mouth. Marcus, all good." Her smile was quick and practiced. She looked at me and said, "Ava, please trust me." The sentence landed like an order. "Amelia, what's going on?" I asked. She stepped forward. "There's another dunner who has been making noises. James Evelyn to check on some invoices. He wanted to keep the guests calm. It's paperwork, Ava." Nothing more. Her explanation was smooth. Amelia's need to protect the family's image was visible in the set of her shoulders. My hands began to shake. I remembered turning the pages of the receipts in his study at midnight. I had found an envelope of receipts and a hotel booking with his name paired with Evelyn's. My head supplied facts I could not ignore. I said, "Amelia, you heard me. I found receipts last night. This isn't just an invoice." I kept my voice steady. Amelia's eyes flicked to James's name and back at me. "Ava, if you make a scene, it will ruin tonight." "Marcus, help me calm her down." She reached for Marcus like a captain calling a signal. Marcus looked at me. "Ava, think about the donors," he said. "Think about how this will look for the foundation." His words tried to frame the problem for me. They treated our marriage as an extension of a brand. I stepped away from both of them. "No, I will not be reduced to a brand," I said. The words surprised even me. I felt something harden in my chest. The urge to stop performing for everyone. That urge had been building since chapter 1, but tonight it sharpened into action. Amelia's voice rose. "Ava, don't do this now." Then she lowered it. "Not here. Not with donors." Her insistence returned to the same refrain. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. "If you want to know, I can watch, I can look. But tonight is not the night to open this in public." He the sentence slowly. Marcus was careful. He always measured consequences. Outside on the corridor landing, a server bumped a tray and a crystal glass rang. The sound pulled us back toward the event. I felt the audience's attention like a pressure wave. Inside, James had already repositioned himself among guests and was laughing at something someone said. He looked composed. The image he offered the room was unbroken. I did not walk back inside. I followed a different impulse. I stayed in the corridor past midnight and kept thinking of the receipts in his study. The receipts had matched the bits of paper now folded and exchanged. My suspicion broadened into a pattern. I needed a fact. I needed a confrontation that not live in the softened corners of the reception. At 2 in the morning, I went to Evelyn Moore's charity office. The office was a compact room with a shelf of framed donor letters and a single desk lamp burning. Evelyn sat behind the desk. She looked tired. There was coffee in a paper cup at her elbow. The lamp light landed on the receipt folded in her palm. "Evelyn," I said. I closed the door behind me. The click felt decisive. She placed the receipt flat on the desk. "Ava, I didn't expect you here." Her voice had a brittle edge. "Why did James give you this?" I asked. I kept my tone even. My suspicion had shifted into anger now. The anger was narrow and precise. Evelyn swallowed. She reached for the coffee and set it down. "It's not what you think," she said. Her eyes avoided mine. "James has been under pressure. There was a man threatening to reveal things. He had evidence. James paid to stop it. I handled payments to a third party so it wouldn't trace back to him." Her explanation rushed out. "Paid to stop what?" I asked. She lifted her chin. "An old loan, a complaint, a file that could ruin a campaign and the foundation. I routed the payments to a fixer so donors would not panic. I thought I was protecting the work." Her hands trembled slightly. I noticed the trimmer and catalogued it. The reveal reoriented the facts. My suspicion shifted again, anger to confusion to a slow, wary clarity. The receipts were payments, but not necessarily proof of an affair. The receipts matched a story James had not told me. That lack of disclosure mattered. I felt both relief and a fresh betrayal. Relief, because the receipts might not mean what my mind had first assumed. Betrayal, because I had not been told. Why didn't he tell me? I asked. Evelyn met my eyes because he thought it would make things worse. He thought keeping it quiet would protect the foundation and you. He didn't think you'd want to know. Her answer landed with blunt honesty. I laughed once, a short sound that had no humor in it. Protect me, I said, by hiding payments. By acting like I am someone who can be kept in the dark. The corridor felt too small for everything I wanted to ask. Evelyn put a hand on the desk. I didn't do this for him. I did it for the foundation. The donors would leave if information surfaced. He panicked. Me. I said yes. She did not back away from the fact. Her confession was a new kind of betrayal. I left Evelyn's office with a paper folder of receipts and a statement that did not answer why James had refused to tell me. The new information changed nothing about how it felt to be kept out of his decision-making. That omission had weight. It shaped the next move I made. I went home and sat in the study where I had already searched the drawers. The house breathed around me. A ticking clock, a heater's soft hum, the faint smell of cedar from James's desk. I spread the documents on the table. I called Marcus and asked him to meet me. He arrived 10 minutes later. Ava, what do you want to do? Marcus. He looked at the documents as if they were blueprints. I want him to tell the truth to me first, I said. My voice was flat. If he's holding things for the foundation, he needs to explain. Not Amelia, not his friends, me. I pushed the folder toward him. Marcus picked up a receipt. He nodded slowly. This tracks. There's a hotel booking here. The same pattern you saw. He spoke plainly. If we go public, donors will ask questions. If we hide it, you will live with it. Either way, people will make choices for you. Do you want that? His question cut clean. I looked at my ring. I thought of guests applauding at the luncheon and of Amelia's hands steering me away from the terrace. I thought of James's calm and how often calm had protected other people's plans. My anger resurfaced. I don't want people making choices for me anymore, I said. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, then you need to set the terms. You need to choose the way you leave the performance. He spoke like a man who had weighed options for others. I heard him name the choice I had practiced in secret. At the charity luncheon the next afternoon, I sat at a table and watched donors pick at their salads. The room smelled of lemon and roast chicken. James sat at the head table, a smile trained and steady. Amelia hovered nearby, offering the right nod at the right moment. I felt the engine of the evening turning. When the dessert plates cleared and conversation moved to upcoming grants, I stood. I felt the room's attention like a physical thing. I walked to the head table and said, "Excuse me," my voice held. James looked at me and managed a polite smile. "Ava, everything okay?" I did not ask permission. I held up the folded receipt. "This was handed across a terrace last night," I said. "This is money that traces to our household." "Who did you pay?" The sentence landed hard. I named the concrete facts. I did not let managers or donors fill in blanks. James's face changed. The practiced smile flickered. Amelia's hand tightened at her napkin. A murmur moved across the room. He stood, but his first words were an apology directed at the room, not at me. "I'm sorry to everyone here for this disruption," he said. "This is a private matter." The sentence was intended to close the topic. I raised my voice an inch. "It's not private if you exchange this in public," people whispered. Marcus watched from the back. Evelyn sat pale and still. I felt the air around me respond. James looked to Amelia. Ava, please." The plea was a small, practical sound. He reached for control. I folded my hand around the receipt again and said, "No, James. Tell them. Tell me. Did you pay someone to silence a claim? Who paid them?" I spoke plainly. I wanted facts drawn into the light. He opened his mouth and closed it twice. Then he stepped away. He chose the room over the explanation. "Ava, not now," he said. He turned to the audience and tried to steer attention back to the luncheon program. He moved like a man trained to contain damage by redirecting focus. Amelia stood beside him and said, "Let's not do this here." Her voice had the authority of a campaign manager. Donors looked confused. Someone near the front cleared their throat. The room wanted stability. James offered it back. I felt something inside me give. I had wanted the truth. I had wanted him to name the risk and the solution to me first. Instead, he picked a shielded retreat. The choice he made in front of everyone was a decision to prioritize image. My anger and disbelief solidified into resolve. I lifted the receipt to the nearest donor. This paper ties to our household. I deserve the explanation, I said. The donor looked at the receipt. Heads turned. James faltered. He stepped back. Ava, don't. His voice broke mid-sentence. He looked away from me and toward Amelia. He chose retreat. He chose the familiar protection of the family's public face. He chose not to meet me. I folded the receipt and placed it on the head table. Then I turned and walked out. The applause for the next speaker rose and followed me like a tide. I did not stop in the corridor or wait for anyone to follow. I put my keys in the lock at home and sat on the kitchen chair while the noise of the luncheon thinned. Marcus arrived later that night with 2 paper cups of coffee and a quiet expression. He sat across from me without comment. What now? He asked. I don't know yet, I said. I took a cup and felt the heat in my hands. My chest felt raw. I folded the ring into a small envelope and set it on the table. My fingers trembled enough that the paper scraped a soft sound. Marcus watched the motion. Ava, you acted. You called them out. He did not praise me. He stated a fact that forces a response. They'll either explain or they'll close ranks. His assessment was steady. Amelia called twice and then texted. James sent a message asking to meet the next morning. I left both unanswered. I thought about the receipts, about Evelyn's confession, and about James stepping away when I demanded truth. That choice told me more than any receipt could. Later that night, Marcus put a hand on the envelope with my ring. Are you sure? He kept his voice low. I slid the band into the envelope and sealed it for now. I said, I need space to choose where I stand. I won't let other people define my limit anymore. I did not promise a public fight. I promised myself clarity. Marcus nodded. I'll stay until you decide what you want to do next. He meant practical support. He meant to help manage phone calls, press, and donors if needed. He had always been the kind of friend who took logistical weight off other people's shoulders. I closed the front door behind me and felt the house shift to a quieter tone. The sound of the luncheon faded. The paper in my hand was small and heavy in a way that felt final. I placed the envelope on the side table and turned off the lamp. I did not offer a flourish or a speech. I did not claim dramatic transformation. I made a decision that night and packed the proof of a life I had been performing into a tiny envelope. I moved from anger to a measured calm that let me think. I would ask James for the full truth in the morning. I would not let someone else decide my boundaries. A knock sounded at the door as I was locking the envelope into a drawer. Marcus's voice came through. I'm leaving you for the night. Call if you need me. He left without waiting. The knock and the silence that followed became the last concrete beat of the evening. I slid my wedding band into a small envelope and shut the door on the luncheon hall. I opened the apartment door and a lipstick-stained napkin slid from James's jacket pocket onto the kitchen floor. Suspicion flared and stayed very close to my throat. The jacket was draped over a chair, collar still warm from his shoulder, and the receipt folded inside the breast pocket showed a name I had seen before. I knew, before my mind had finished the sentence, what the folded paper might mean. James handing a receipt to Evelyn in a quiet corridor. The way he'd slipped something into her hand at the terrace, images from the reception like needles. Suspicion pushed my feet forward. My left hand tightened on the door frame until I felt my ring against my palm. I am Ava Monroe. I am 29. I wear shoulder-length dark brown hair in soft waves, and tonight my wedding band felt heavier than it had in years. I walked across the kitchen, boots tapping on the tile, and I set the shopping bag down by the fruit bowl as if filling a practical task would stop my chest from moving too fast. The kitchen light was on. His phone lay face down on the counter. A napkin, creased and stained, glinted at the edge of his jacket pocket. The concrete stakes were visible. A name, a stain, a folded receipt that matched the ones I'd seen him hand to Evelyn earlier. The problem was not a vague wrongness. It was a series of small objects that told a simpler story. He had been taking care to hide exchanges, and now a bit of paper and a napkin were on my kitchen floor. I heard the hallway noise through the thin door. A neighbor's laugh, the muffled bass of the reception music still humming from earlier. The apartment smelled of coffee and his cedar cologne. I said his name before I had a plan. James. I said, and my voice was flat enough that it sounded like a fact rather than an accusation. He came out of the bedroom with his hands empty, sleeves rolled, eyes steady, but not meeting mine, Ava, he said. He moved toward the counter as if to pick up a cup. His hand passed over his jacket. He did not pick it up. Suspicion shifted to anger in the same quick, awful way hunger shifts to nausea. I had rehearsed being polite for years. Smiles at charity dinners, the practiced laugh when somebody praised our life. Now polite felt like a costume I could not find the zipper on. What is this? I asked, and I pulled the jacket toward me by the collar. The napkin slid free and unfurled in my hand like an accusation. James blinked. He reached for the napkin with one finger, hesitated, and then retracted his hand. It's nothing, Ava. His voice was low. He stacked syllables like a man arranging his cufflinks, just a receipt. Accounting thing, accounting. I held up the receipt where the numbers and a name were visible. You gave Evelyn a receipt at the terrace. You handed one to her in the corridor. I set the receipt on the counter, as if placing evidence on a table. I said the memory out loud so the rooms of my head would stop looping it. James's jaw tightened. He stared at the counter as if the numbers were a puzzle he needed to solve. You saw that? He asked. Yes. I did not step back. I saw you hand her something in the corridor. I saw you hand her something at the reception. He inhaled. There was a careful pause that felt like a measured risk. Ava, listen. It's not what you think. The pause became another thing. Doubt. For a moment I saw another track of explanation opening like a door on a hallway. Doubt moved through me, anger loosened a fraction. Then tell me, I said. He started to form the explanation, but his phone lit on the counter with a preview that made both of us look. Evelyn, see you later, flashed across the screen. He snatched the phone away before the rest of the message showed. His hand was quick enough that the movement read to me like concealment rather than casualness. At that exact moment, my sister Grace texted back to the worried message I had sent her earlier. The 3 dots of a pending message were on my screen, and I realized I'd asked for backup without thinking. Within minutes the door opened and Grace stepped in without knocking, keys still in her fingers, coat half on and eyes already assessing like she had been trained for domestic triage. Ava, what is going on? Grace, dropping her bag and closing the door with a click. She glanced at James, then at the jacket, then at me. Her face held a question she did not let sit in the air. Grace, look. I held out the napkin and the receipt like 2 pieces from a broken set. He gave this to her. He handed her a receipt in the corridor. I felt my voice tear where a word should have been. Grace's mouth tightened. James, she said. Her tone was not just sisterly. It had the practical edge of a woman used to sorting problems into boxes and labeling them. Show me everything. James sat on the kitchen stool as if the floor under him had turned to ice. He smoothed his jacket with a hand that trembled slightly at the wrist. Grace, this is private. Ava, please. He avoided looking at me. I can explain. He tried to explain. The words that meant he was protecting people, that there were obligations he had not spoken about, that some arrangements were made in private to avoid public drama. He calmly. There are family matters, Ava. I've been handling something for years. I thought you've been meeting her in hallways and passing her notes, James. Grace interrupted. Handling what? What family matters require folded receipts and secrecy at a reception. James's voice grew steady with that same practical cadence he used for board meetings. I didn't want to drag this into the open. I thought I could manage it without hurting anyone. Who else did you think you weren't hurting? I demanded. My fingers found the small gold pendant around my neck as if needing the weight of something real. James, don't tell me you didn't see how it looked. Don't tell me you didn't think about me. He swallowed. He tried to place the narrative into neat boxes. Credit lines, reimbursements, a private obligation he had taken on because an outsider had come asking for help. For a few sentences I listened because his voice fit the pattern he'd used for years, polished, practical, focused on preserving appearances. But while he spoke, I kept scanning the kitchen counter the way a detective scans a room for hidden doors. My hand slid to the fruit bowl where earlier I had dropped the shopping bag. My fingers brushed paper at the base of the bowl. I pulled it out and my breath stopped before I could decide whether that was fear or something else. A small hotel keycard fell into my palm, the type with a magnetic stripe and a strip of adhesive where a name had been rubbed off. Under it, folded inside a receipt envelope, I found a photograph. The photograph showed James with Evelyn in close proximity, a private angle that didn't belong to a public reception photo. They were leaning close. James's hand rested at the small of her back. Evelyn's eyebrow was raised in a way that read to anyone as intimate. My stomach dropped. The room shrank to the size of the table. There was a silence long enough for the clock in the living room to make a small, distinct noise. Grace looked first at the photograph, then at James Carter, she said slowly, using his full name like a label that could not be smoothed away. "What is this?" He reached toward the photograph with a face that had moved from composed to something taut and strained. "I can explain," he said. The sentence was no longer smooth. "I didn't think you'd find that." Doubt fell away. The small, precise pile of items on the counter had changed the shape of reality in the room. Suspicion had become anger, anger had become a demand for truth, then doubt had appeared and dissolved. Emotion shifted again, from suspicion to anger to doubt to a raw, hot clarity that left no room for compromise. There is a part of me that had been performing alongside him for years, smiling at the right moment, answering the right questions. Now that performance had to end. I looked at James and saw a man who had thought he could keep a private line open and still maintain the broadcast. I looked at Grace and saw a sister who refused to let me be managed by someone else's careful choices. Before James could form the next sentence, the doorbell rang. The sound had the implacable quality of an event that arrives whether we want it or not. Grace moved to the door with a quick, decisive step and opened it. Evelyn stood there, coat over one arm, hair done in a simple way, eyes not contrite but steady. She carried a folder in one hand. Her arrival was not tentative. She held herself like someone who had rehearsed this scene. "Evelyn, Grace." Her voice was small, but it cut across the room. I watched James's face narrow. He had not expected her to come here. He had expected the night to continue in private paper and private pockets. Evelyn put the folder on the hallway table and used the words that made whatever came next unavoidable. "Ava, I think we need to speak in the living room." "All of you," her voice was clear. She did not step in until Grace had opened the door fully. Inside, the three of them faced each other like a triangle where each corner held a different account of the same history. Evelyn sat with her folder on her lap and opened it. She pulled out pages that showed invoices, photocopies of bank transfers, appointment confirmations. She set them on the coffee table in a neat stack. "This is not what it looks like," she said. And then she showed us a document that changed the angle of how I had been seeing everything. The stack of papers had dates and small notes in James's handwriting. There were transfers labeled support and arrangement and lines that indicated payments to landlords, medical invoices, and a name I had not expected to see in connection to Evelyn. Evelyn's voice stayed steady as she read one line. "I had a son I couldn't keep safe." James helped with the rent and the legal fees. He paid for a room where we could stay while I got him into care. He handed me receipts because he wanted a paper trail for myself. He didn't want anyone to know I was here. Grace looked from the papers to James, and her eyes were like a searchlight, so he was paying her. She asked for what? Evelyn put the photograph on the table where we could all see it. That picture was taken after James drove me to the hospital the night my boy was born, and I had no one else to call. He held me steady for 10 minutes while the nurse found better coverage. The camera angle made it look like something else. I didn't ask for that photo to be taken, but I kept it because I needed proof of what happened. I held the photograph and looked from one face to another. The image did not change, but the explanation pulled at a hinge inside how I had understood the earlier corridor exchanges. The first twist was this. The receipts were not necessarily secret payments for an affair, but could be reimbursements for shelter and medical costs. That shifted a part of the narrative I had built in my head. James sat very still. His voice was low. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want to put Ava in the middle of someone else's crisis. I thought I could manage it, pay it out discreetly, keep it off the books. He looked at me at last. I didn't expect to be handing receipts at a reception. I didn't expect to be clumsy. Grace's hands were folded in her lap like a woman mending a torn seam. So you were supporting Evelyn because of a child? She asked. She spoke to break the silence, to force facts onto the table. James, why did you hide this? Why in corridors? Why not tell me? James blinked. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Because I was afraid it would become a headline. Because we have a position, and I thought if I could keep it quiet we could avoid the damage. I handled his legal support and housing until he was stable. I thought discretion would be better. A new shift arrived in me, from clarity to confusion. The receipts remained receipts. The photograph remained what it was. But the motive had moved. James had been protecting someone who needed help. That did not erase my feeling of betrayal. It added a painful, complicated layer that made the problem worse in some ways. He'd kept me out of a life he was living at the edges of our own. I spoke because I needed to put the pieces in a straight line. James, you kept me out of a chapter of your life that affected you enough to give receipts and drive people to hospitals. You hid meetings and passed notes. You gave her money and didn't tell me. That's not just discretion, that's exclusion. He put his hands on the counter, leaning forward as if searching for equilibrium. I thought I was protecting you. I thought you wouldn't want to be dragged into this while we were building our public life. I thought I could do both and not have anyone hurt. You thought, I said, and the phrase felt brittle. You thought for both of us. Evelyn stood up and took a step toward James. Her voice was softer now, but direct. James didn't do this from malice. He did it because I had no one else. When his wife saw him handing me a receipt at the terrace, I didn't ask for explanation. I didn't want to cause a scene. I asked for help. She looked at me. Ava, I'm not here to tear down your life. I'm here because he promised to help my son get into care. If my presence tonight ruined something, I'm sorry. The room tightened with words. Grace's mouth closed and opened as she tried to place the terms of what justice and loyalty meant in a family context. Ava, you need to decide what you want. She said, you can't keep performing for everyone else. That sentence landed like a tool. It did not tell me what to feel, but it reminded me of a thing I had known. The majority of my days lately had been scheduled around appearances. The question was whether I would keep rehearsing a life someone else could approve of. I stood, walked to the sofa, and sat with the photograph folded in my hands. I felt the ring on my finger like a physical hinge. I fidgeted with it, turning it until it pressed into my skin. James, did you touch her like that because you wanted to? I asked, and the words were small and sharp. He answered in a set of sentences that moved between denial, admission, and something that might be called shame. There were times I put my arm around her to steady her. There were meetings we had that involved more than paperwork. I can't say they were just transactional. I didn't keep count. There were 3 rapid exchanges then, one after another, a short back, and fourth like someone trying to pry open a stuck window. So you were with her? Grace demanded, not in the way you mean most of the time, James. But there were moments when boundaries loosened. Boundaries loosened. I repeated, you mean you let things happen? James's voice went rough. I let things happen because I was tired, because I felt sorry, because I was trying to help. I am not excusing it. Evelyn looked at James and then at me. I never asked him to leave his marriage. He offered to help. I accepted because I had no option. I wasn't looking for a life with him. I was looking for a safe bed and someone to call when the social worker said no one else was available. The room had shifted again. A twist had changed the shape of the story. The receipts were still receipts. The photograph was still a photograph. But motive had rearranged the stakes. That did not make choosing easier. It made choosing more urgent. I thought of the terrace, of James handing a folded receipt in plain view, as if it were nothing more than an errand. I thought of the private corridor where I'd seen him press paper into Evelyn's hand in Chapter 1. I thought of all the small acts of concealment that had become a life. I felt betrayed by omission and by acts that had crossed boundaries. I set the photograph on the coffee table and reached for my left hand. I slid the ring off slowly, one finger at a time, and the metal made a small sound against my knuckle. My fingers trembled. Grace watched me without saying anything, an ally making space. James made no move to stop me. He looked at the ring in my hand as if counting some ledger of mistakes. "I'm not willing to perform for the sake of what people think anymore," I said, and my voice was steady. I folded the napkin and the receipt and the photograph and put them into the drawer where we kept manuals and spare batteries. I will not be less than honest to preserve appearances. I will not be the person who smiles while secrets are tucked into jacket pockets. Grace reached into her coat and pulled out a small wallet with cash and a card. "I'll come with you," she said. "I have a suitcase in my trunk. We can get you out tonight. We'll figure out the legal steps tomorrow." She spoke in practical sentences that sounded like equipment for a plan. James stood up and moved to the doorway like a man trying to find purchase. "Ava, let's talk about logistics. I cut him off. "No more logistics, James. Not as a way to keep me from knowing what's true." I put the ring on the coffee table, next to the papers, as if placing a marker down. "I will need time and space. I need Grace here. I need a clear account of what you paid for and why. I need proof of the extent of your involvement and the boundaries you crossed." He swallowed. "I'll give you everything. I'll show you everything I have. I'll be transparent." "That's not the same as being honest while it mattered," I said. I stood and began to pack a small bag. I moved with a kind of focused calm, picking up my worn leather jacket from the back of the chair, folding a couple of shirts, slipping in my minimal watch, and placing my gold pendant into a jewelry pouch. Packing felt like doing something real. Grace brought a bag with a zipper and began sorting clothing into it. She included a charger, a spare sweater, a pair of boots. We moved through the apartment quietly, the three of us in the same spaces but no longer inhabiting the same terms. At one point, James moved to hand me an envelope. "There are bank transfers and notes in here," he said. "I thought if you saw them you might understand. I should have told you. I'm sorry." I took the envelope and slid it into my own bag without opening it. I wanted the choice to look at it when I could handle the facts without collapsing into argument. I wanted to keep the evidence in my own hands. "I will see it when I'm ready," I said. Evelyn stood in the doorway for a moment as if framing her exit. "I'm sorry for the role I played in this. I never meant to make your life harder. If leaving is what Ava needs, I'll step away. I will keep the records if they help. I won't come between you again." Her voice wavered only a fraction. Grace closed the apartment door behind us with a measured, final motion. The hallway smelled of cleaning detergent and the faint echo of late night shoes. We walked down 3 flights with a few bags between us. Outside, the night was soft, golden under the street lamp. It washed the city in the warm tone we've lived under for the last few receptions and gala photos. The light did not comfort me. It simply made the world visible. At the stoop, I paused and turned back. The apartment windows showed a rectangle of warm interior. I could have gone back inside for 100 exhausted reasons. To demand explanations, to forgive, to keep the lie neat. Instead, I put the ring on the polished table in the entryway and heard its faint metallic click. It landed there like a record of a decision. Grace handed me the car keys. "We'll go to my place tonight," she said. "Tomorrow we'll call a lawyer in the morning. We'll call your mother if you want. We'll sort the bank statements." She each thing in short sentences, making an itinerary out of a fracture. I nodded. I felt small relief, like a breath finally released. It was not triumph. It was the honest fact of leaving a room where choices had been made without me. I thought briefly of our public life, of the way everyone expected us to keep trying because we'd always kept trying before. Those expectations did not matter anymore. What mattered was the concrete set of steps we were taking. Ring on the table, bags in the trunk, Grace driving, me holding the envelope of bank transfers and hotel receipts that might explain what had started as secrecy and had become betrayal. I closed the apartment door behind me. The latch made a short, decisive sound. The click marked the end of a performance and the start of practical steps. Calling a lawyer, arranging finances, finding a place to sleep that night. Grace slid her coat more tightly around her shoulders and put the car into gear. As we pulled away, I looked out at the building facade receding in the streetlight. The rectangle of my window receded too. The evidence was in a drawer now and on a table, not only in the dark corners of my guesses. I had answers to find and choices to make. I had a set of documents to review and a sister who would not let me be managed by someone else's idea of stability. Inside my bag, the folded hotel key and the photograph rested beside the envelope of receipts James had offered. They were small, specific objects, and they would guide the work ahead. Tonight I would sleep in Grace's spare room. Tomorrow, I would begin the practical work of separating a life that had been sustained by appearance from the life I actually wanted to inhabit. For now, the ring on the table, the envelope in my hand, and the single sound of the apartment latch closing were enough to mark that something had changed in the visible world around me. We drove on. Grace turned the radio down. She reached across and squeezed my hand once, a brief, steady contact that said she would hold the seams while I began to untangle them. I kept my fingers curled around the envelope, an immediate archive of what had been hidden. The night passed in streetlights and the hush of the highway, and I breathed with my mouth open for the first honest time in a very long while. The final move in the apartment had been concrete, sliding the ring to the table, packing a bag, leaving the apartment with Grace. The next moves would be paperwork, calls, and decisions about custody of the life we had presented to the world. There were no grand speeches, no cinematic epiphanies. There were receipts, a photograph, and a phone that would have to be opened in full light. The last sound I heard before I fell into a sleep that was not performance was the click of the latch behind us, small and absolute.